It's kind of crazy to think about, right? How one single moment, one single action can spiral so completely out of control that it changes the entire world. Well, on June 28, 1914, that's exactly what happened. A political assassination in a city most people hadn't heard of became the spark for a global catastrophe, and we're going to break down exactly how it all went down.
And it all starts here. Not with some grand declaration in a palace, not on a huge battlefield, but with a single bullet on a street corner in Sarajevo. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the fact that this one tiny piece of metal would be the catalyst for one of the absolute deadliest conflicts in all of human history.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? How did it happen? How does one act of violence manage to drag the entire globe into a war that would literally redraw maps, topple ancient empires, and totally change the way we fight forever? Let's trace it back step by step.
Okay, so first up, the spark. We're talking about the one event that lit the fuse on this global powder keg. A political assassination that had consequences that, believe me, nobody at the time could have possibly seen coming.
So let's meet the key players. You've got Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire. He's visiting Sarajevo, and he and his wife are both shot and killed by Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old nationalist who wanted his people to be free from Austrian rule. Well, as you can imagine, the empire was absolutely furious, and they pointed the finger directly at the nation of Serbia.
And then everything just completely fell apart with shocking speed. I mean, look at this timeline. In just 37 days, a regional crisis exploded into a war across the continent. You have an assassination, which leads to an ultimatum, which leads to a declaration of war. And suddenly, massive armies are marching all over Europe. The dominoes weren't just falling, they were basically being kicked over.
But why? Why did so many countries get involved so fast? You know, the answer isn't just about this one assassination. It was about this incredibly tangled web of promises and treaties that had been built up for years, all fueled by nationalism, rivalries between empires, and a massive arms race.
And here's the real heart of the problem. Europe at the time was basically divided into two huge military alliances. You had the Allied powers and the Central powers. And these weren't just friendly handshakes. These were ironclad promises that said, if you get attacked, my army is your army. So when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Serbia's ally, Russia, started to mobilize. Well, that triggered Germany to come in and defend Austria-Hungary. And you can see how this just blew up.
Essentially, this whole alliance system acted like a giant tripwire. A fight that really should have been between two countries suddenly became everybody's problem. And just like that, what started in the Balkans was now, officially, a world war.
So, with the world at war, millions of young men were sent to the front lines. But what they found when they got there, well, it was a new kind of hell on earth.
This was the brutal reality for the average soldier. Forget any glorious battles in open fields. They were living, sleeping, and dying in these huge networks of muddy, filthy, disease-ridden trenches. Just try to imagine the constant fear of artillery shells raining down, the smell of poison gas drifting across the battlefield, and the absolute terror of hearing that whistle and being ordered over the top into a storm of machine gun fire.
And these names, Verdun, Gallipoli, the Somme, they became infamous. They're basically code words for industrial-scale slaughter. We're talking hundreds of thousands of men dying just to capture a few yards of mud, only to probably lose it again a few days later. It was a horrifying stalemate, a human meat grinder.
Just take a second and really absorb that number. Over 1 million casualties, that's killed or wounded, in just one single battle, the Battle of the Somme. It just shows you the insane, unprecedented scale of the killing. This wasn't war as anyone had ever known it before.
So what made this war so incredibly deadly? Well, it was a terrible collision of old-school tactics with brand-new, terrifyingly efficient technology.
Yeah, this was really the birth of modern warfare. You had generals using 19th century tactics, like charging across open fields, against 20th century killing machines. The machine gun basically turned no man's land into a death zone. Poison gas brought a new, invisible terror. Tanks were invented as these mechanical beasts to try and break the stalemate. And then you had airplanes and submarines, meaning the war was now being fought in the air and under the sea. It was a technological leap that armies were just tragically unprepared to deal with.
So, after 4 long years of just unimaginable bloodshed, the gears of war finally, slowly, began to grind to a halt.
A huge turning point came in 1917 when the United States joined the Allies.
That influx of fresh troops and supplies was just too much for the totally exhausted Central Powers, and they started to crumble. Finally, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, an armistice was signed, and after 4 years, the guns fell silent.
But the end of the fighting didn't bring a real lasting peace. And this is arguably the most important takeaway from the whole thing. The Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, was less about creating peace and way more about punishment. It forced Germany to pay crippling amounts of money and accept full, 100% blame for the war. This created this deep, simmering resentment and economic chaos that many historians argue planted the seeds for an even worse war just 20 years later.
You really can't overstate the impact of this war. 4 massive empires, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman, were just gone, shattered. The map of Europe was completely redrawn, and the political landscape of the entire planet was changed, fundamentally and forever.
And all of that leaves us with one final chilling question. When you look at how the First World War ended, with so much anger, so much bitterness left unresolved, was the horror of a Second World War already baked into the cake? Was it inevitable?